Well, the most anticipated event of this G20 summit has been the first meeting of the Russian and US presidents. And it appears to have met at least some of the expectations, ending with a breakthrough. Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump have agreed to establish a ceasefire in 3 areas of Syria. The announcement was made by Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Russia, the US and Jordan have reached a ceasefire agreement for Syria. The ceasefire will come into effect in 3 areas: Dera, Quneitra and Sueda. It will come into force on the 9th of July at 12 a.m. Damascus time. The US and Russia have committed to monitoring the ceasefire and ensuring humanitarian access to the areas. Initially, security in these areas will be ensured by Russian military police in close cooperation with the US and Jordan.
Ilya Petrenko, who's also in Hamburg for us, has more on those talks between Putin and Trump and what they achieved.
What a Friday it was for Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin at the G20 summit in Hamburg. The 2 leaders finally met and talked about 3 times longer than both administrations expected initially. Now, straight after the meeting was over, all the journalists here were hungry for the details, and we got them from the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. He was the first one to announce the breakthrough ceasefire. You may be skeptical about the breakthrough. Fair enough. Syria ceasefires struck by Washington and Russia, by far not a success story in the past, but under Barack Obama, we didn't hear about decisions like Friday's one at all. It was up to John Kerry to do the job when it comes to Syria diplomacy on the part of the U.S. In the build-up to this, the #1 issue discussed in the U.S. media was whether Donald Trump was going to bring up the issue of Russian interference in the U.S. election. Well, I can tell you that American journalists didn't give their president a chance to be the first one to bring this question up.
Thank you very much.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who was also in that room during the talks, told us that the American president opened his discussion with his Russian counterpart by citing the concerns of the American people over allegations of Russian hacking. Rex Tillerson went on to say that the president came back to that question several times, but Vladimir Putin kept denying any involvement. In the meantime, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, says that Russia's take on this issue hasn't changed.
Trump said that this campaign has been blown out of all proportion, and that's been admitted by those involved. These accusations have been around for many months, but no evidence has been provided. Trump says that Putin denied any involvement in the U.S. elections, and he accepts that.
On a lighter note, I want to play you something else that we heard from U.S. Secretary of State. Rex Tillerson explained why the first ever Putin-Trump talks lasted for so long.
There was so much to talk about. All these issues, just about everything got touched on to one degree or another. And I think there was just such a level of engagement and exchange, neither one of them wanted to stop. Several times I had to remind the president, people were sticking their heads in the door, and I think they sent in the First Lady at one point to see if she could get us out of there, and that didn't work either.
What we will be watching out for right now is, of course, the reaction from across the Atlantic, because, take my word, President Donald Trump will be under a lot of pressure back home for what Rex Tillerson called a true chemistry between the presidents of Russia and the U.S.
Middle East expert Bariat Wan believes that the agreement may open the way towards peace in Syria.
The ceasefire could be a huge step toward a permanent solution for the Syrian crisis. And I believe those 2 presidents are the only one who can conclude and who can reach this kind of agreement. Now, if the American and the Russian sit together and agreed on a ceasefire, everybody will adhere to this ceasefire, and we could have Dera as the de-escalation zone. The agreement between the 2 superpowers here could succeed, especially in the south. And if we have a ceasefire in the south, it means Syria actually will will be transformed into a stable country, and the war, the crisis, could be ended soon, and could be after that the move toward some sort of political reforms which actually could consolidate the stability in the whole of Syria.
We've seen ceasefire after ceasefire break down in Syria, but that happened under the Obama administration, who had was notorious for a very weak and feckless foreign policy. President Trump has asserted American strength again, and is working with our Sunni Arab allies. He had a very successful meeting in Saudi Arabia with the king and with other moderate Arab regimes. And I think that based on the fact that we have two strong leaders in President Putin and President Trump, there's a greater likelihood, I'm not going to predict success just yet, but I think there's a much greater likelihood that the ceasefire will hold now as opposed to several months back prior to the Trump administration.